Most beginner orchestrators think bigger orchestra is a bigger sound, so they keep adding instruments. More brass, more strings, more brass on top of brass, more woodwinds. But today I want to talk about why that might be the reason why the orchestra sounds small. Today I want to show you 3 ways to make your orchestra sound big by doing less. First point is just because something is there doesn't mean you need to use it. I understand the reality of when you load up something and you know in your head that you want to do something orchestral and you load up your DAW or you load up your sheet music and then you see walls of blank, right? Blank MIDI tracks, blank staves in Dorico or whatever it is that you're using. I know the feeling, but I want to encourage you to resist the temptation to put something there just because it's blank and you're scared of what will happen if you don't put something there. I want to show you the very beginning of a track I did for Horizons of Achaia. I used this in a previous video. It's an airship departure, but it's a great example of what I'm talking about. I wanted a big bombastic opening, right? Now remember, this is a 2.5 minute track. And I wanted a bombastic opening, but I also knew that later on in the track, I was going to have an even more bombastic section. If something is big the entire time, it suddenly feels like, well, how much bigger can you actually get? Versus if you selectively make something big, orchestrate something huge, whatever you want to call it, if you do that selectively, it actually can help things feel bigger in context. So let's just look at the very, very beginning. Here is the opening to Airship Departure. The very, very beginning here. Okay, it's fairly bombastic, right? But it's not overwhelmingly like trumpets blaring, everything going at the same time. So let's dissect what's actually happening. Using the sheet music as an example, the woodwinds are creating a sort of dovetail, as they call this, right? Creating this perpetual pattern that never stops. Remember that woodwind players need to breathe, right? So that's why it's literally like I have flute 1, passing then down to flute, I'll use a different color, passing down to flute 2, and then back to flute 1, but it's all a big single line, right? So it's not like I have 2 flutes in unison at maximum fullness with 2 oboes in unison at maximum fullness. It's creating this, the musical line is there, but it's an alternating pattern. So it doesn't have as much thickness perpetually, okay? Now, you'll also notice, there's no bassoons because I don't need them. Right? I don't need bassoons right there. I don't need absolutely max low bassoon with bass clarinet is there and contrabassoon. And mostly, I would have bassoons if this weren't happening, but I also have trombones here. Okay, trombones, bass trombone, tuba, and cellos and double bass, right? They're creating this kind of low, thick chord anyway. And I also knew that later on here at the second page, that I would need the bassoons to sort of soften this trombone texture. So not only am I saying, okay, I don't need the bassoons in the beginning because I have all these other instruments covering that ground, but I also know when I get here, I want the low winds, bass clarinet, bassoon, contrabassoon, to soften the brass texture. That was that when the strings came in and did a melody, my approach here was to soften this brass texture to make it all feel less brassy. Pro tip, if you literally throw bassoons in unison with trombones, like 1-to-1, like you see here, it softens that brassy texture. It's not quite like, oh, now that brass texture is getting even more intense. It's kind of taking the edge off of the otherwise trombone and tuba texture. So, pro tip, fun fact. Biggest thing to notice though, I don't have trumpets. I'm not using trumpets here. I could have started with trumpets if I wanted, like a big yada-da-dum, but I knew I wanted an awesome trumpet thing to happen later. So I'm saying, okay, I don't need that. And it brings me to a second point, which is climaxes have to be earned. I'm using a lot of terminology in this video that I may regret later. However, climaxes have to be earned when it comes to orchestration. If everything is big all the time, my goodness, this script is killing me. If everything is big all the time and everything is a climax, those climaxes don't get earned. like the opening of the video, just to kind of demonstrate a big orchestra, I'm gonna play it right here, starting from the beginning of that section, right? I gave you the biggest moment. That is when everybody's going, trumpets included. I'm gonna start from a little bit before that, okay? So you can hear how it builds up, that I don't need everybody going the entire climax of the piece. That whole section is its own section, right? The defining quality being the strings. But notice that those strings, they are perpetually going through there, right? So even though the dynamic is smaller and it grows to forte, that pattern is there. That's what gives it a defining, like, here's the section of music. Also pay attention to the fact that when it's quieter here, this is when that whole section starts, measure 47. When it's quieter, look at how many blank staves that I have. Yada-dum, bum, ba-da-bum, bum, 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 ba-da-bum. A single clarinet, then going down. Yum, bum, 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 ba. As it grows, dynamically, loudness, as things get louder, that's when the density grows. So that is a terrific rule of thumb that I recommend everyone out there watching this video to remember, is that when your dynamic grows, the louder something gets, the more that you might actually need a bit of that density, but not everybody necessarily, but that density, that growing density, to make it feel loud, right? Certainly you can have just loud strings and that creates its own effect, but if you're going for the big orchestra sound, you need a bit of that density. Point being is, even in this big section, when we finally make the landing point and those trumpets go bum bum ba da 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 dun, notice that there is still space. It's not like the trumpets are, here we're at the big section, and now they gotta be playing the whole time on just big old chords, right? You could even break it down one step further, and in the brass, when the brass hit, they're not even necessarily just playing sustained, here's the whole tone, and here's this chord, and then here's the whole, not whole tone, whole note, and here's this chord, but rather there's articulated, yampa, yampa. It gives it a bit of life. Even in a big, big, big section, it's not like everybody is doing something all the time at the same time, right? So that's also a key difference. Not everybody's just kind of sustaining, and it's like you have just a wall of a chord and a melody, and a wall of a chord and a melody, but rather you have various articulations happening. Lastly, prioritize texture before density. So what do I mean by that? This kind of goes more into sort of compositional creative ideas here, but very often I think the default is to just throw just the canvas at the wall and, for example, give the melody to everybody, right? Like, for example, have your flutes an octave above trumpets. Maybe the flutes are in unison with violin 1, and then trumpets are in unison with violin 2, and the oboe's also doing the melody, and maybe the French horn's also doing the melody, and everybody's doing the melody. And while that can be effective, right? Great example would be Across the Stars from Star Wars Episode 2, John Williams. Like, let me tell you, that climax, everybody's got the melody because it works. But if you do that all the time, then everything's gonna sound exactly the same. Whereas if you say, okay, here's my idea, the more you start to blend together, the less distinct a line becomes. Real quick interruption. If you want to learn about cool unison pairings, I know I'm talking about how you want identifiable textures. There are textures that, when combined, kind of create a new identity or a new instrument. If you want to check out more about those doublings or those pairings, check out my free orchestration starter kit in the description below. I go kind of into detail with some of those pairings, and it might be useful for you. So check it out. So let's look at the end of this Northern Lights. I have this kind of big build, as you can see here, sort of these swells, and then swells again, and then swells some more, and then the whole texture kind of grows. Even if you don't read sheet music, you can kind of see this big old trajectory of, we got stuff down here, and then we got stuff here, and then everything starts to just expand in either direction, top to bottom. Before we listen to it, I want you to pay attention. There's a counter melody that happens. It's like a ba yum ba ba bum 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 ba 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 bum. I wanted that to feel brassy, right? So despite this whole brass section being a giant brass section, trumpets and trombones are without a doubt, in a wind symphony context or in a symphony orchestra context, are without a doubt the most brassy sounding brass, right? Especially when they're loud. They have that cuivre, right? They just have that, they have that bite. That's what I wanted that counter melody to be. So I'm gonna play this build here. I'll start with the video and then I'll move over to the sheet music.
Even if we're unseen, to send a message, to send a message.
So take a bird's eye view back and thinking purely about texture here. Yes, I wanted big density, but I also wanted the things in that big density to have distinct identity. So the trumpets and the trombones, counter melody. High woodwinds, flourishes up there, kind of with the oboes and clarinets. Oboes and clarinets are kind of doing their own thing, sort of back and forth between the flutes. And then saxophones and French horns and euphonium creating harmony in the center. And then tuba, trombone 3, bari sax, bass clarinet, and bassoon. You know, again, very similar to the orchestra context. They're taking care of the bass line for these big moments. So even when you have a big moment, creating texture separation can really help create clarity, not only clarity, but also intrigue. This way you can take certain ideas and move them in, you know, maybe subsequent climaxes. Just change up the color a little bit. So it's not all just one big blob anymore, but it's rather a distinct sound within the big blob, if that makes sense. So thank you so much for watching. Let me know if you have ever run into this challenge. If you have ever run into, what do I do? Do I just throw everybody at the page? When do I throw everybody at the page? Or when do I just use a select few? If you've ever run into that, let me know. I'd love to help you out with that. Let me know in the comments. And if you want to learn more about strings specifically, check out this video here, where I dive more into thinking about how to think like a string player to improve your string writing. All right, y'all, I'll catch you soon. Thank you again, and take care.
See the clouds, they ride